Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Eric Shine. I'm a graduate of the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point in New York. It is a sister academy to West Point and Annapolis, the Air Force Academy, and yes, of course, the Coast Guard Academy. I am not in, nor have I ever served in the U.S. Coast Guard. I'm a naval officer coming out of Kings Point, but the Coast Guard, and this is why I've come forth to try to expose and explain some of this information of what is going on behind the scenes. The Coast Guard has been prosecuting me for the last 5 years for, quote unquote, being depressed. They have seized medical records, falsified medical records, put out a BOLO, or be on the lookout, saying that I may be dangerous. They pulled me out of civil court where I had actually gone after many of the federal contractors, similar to Halliburton or KBR and what they're doing in Iraq, but these were actually shipping companies who signed federal contracts and general agency agreements with the United States, who have been defrauding the United States for some time. And the Coast Guard is acting as a risk manager, coming out to prevent, or they have what's called a preventions department, and are using the Coast Guard as a, and I hate to use the term Gestapo, but they are coming out to affect the rights of federal maritime officers, not only to get into the federal district courts and or state courts for a redress of grievances or to address federal contracting violations, key tam or false claims by these enormous federal contractors. They are using it as a form of a Pinkertons of sorts, or a public sector paid for by the tax dollars directly, agency or department or branch of military, much like Blackwater, of 42,000 strong personnel, and they are using it to help the corporations, to help the quote-unquote large players in the industry, and to dissolve union contracts, federal contracts, to make it to where trying to enforce federal contracts and investigate any corruptions therein is next to impossible, and anyone as a whistleblower or complainant or grievant who steps forward under their First Amendment rights to expose the corruption or have it corrected are being taken out by the Coast Guard, literally using these administrative processes, these backdoor military tribunals, to go after and use. The Coast Guard is bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice. On one hand, it says that it is a branch of military, a special branch of military. It is saying that it is allowed by law somehow, although there is no law that exists that would state this, that it is a special branch of military that the Posse Comitatus Act of 1872 does not apply to somehow. Posse Comitatus was enacted to prevent any branch of military from acting as a police force against the people. The Coast Guard has gone beyond this. They're not only acting as a quote-unquote police force, but they are acting as judge, jury, and executioner, and have set up these backdoor star chambers or witch trials or privy council. These are things that went on in Europe, and it is similar to a witch hunt. Or Spanish Inquisition. And it is being carried out under military law, not civilian law, to where people are presumed guilty. They are being prosecuted by active employees of the Coast Guard, the administrative law judge, they call him. In my own situation is this Walter J. Brodzinski. He's a lieutenant commander in the Coast Guard. Retired or active, it's in question, but he's still getting paid by the Coast Guard today. The prosecutor is a JAG officer, Judge Advocate General Officer Corps officer, who has been paid by the Coast Guard. He is in uniform and they are declaring that they are a branch of military, not I. They are declaring that I am a civilian like you, which means that they can grab any civilian off the street, charge them, and you think about what's going on with single-payer health care, they can pull you off the street, and if you're depressed, you're upset, your family member dies, your pet dies, all of a sudden you can be prosecuted and held against your will for up to 5 years or more. They have other individuals who have been trapped within these proceedings for 10 years. One individual for failing to pass a drug test, rather than retesting him and setting up some kind of a remedial program and getting this guy back to work, they've held him in these proceedings for 10 years and not only denied his right to work, but carried on an entire program of waste, fraud, abuse, and gross mismanagement, like in my own situation, where federal tax dollars are being used to run these witch trials, the series of Spanish Inquisitions that the Coast Guard is carrying on behind the scenes. And they are saying on one hand that they are a police agency, a police law enforcement maritime agency, and then on the other that they are a special branch of military. You cannot be both at the same time. And that's why the Coast Guard was set up, so that in times of police or in times of peace, it would be a police law enforcement agency, and in times of war and declared war by Congress only, it would move under the authority of the Department of Navy, and then would come under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And what has happened today with the movement of the Coast Guard into Homeland Security, it has taken the Uniform Code of Military Justice with it, Title 10, and is trying to say that it now in Homeland Security is a branch of military. It does not have a secretary. If you look at the Department of Defense, all of the defense departments or the branches of military there, the Army has a Secretary of the Army. The Navy has a Secretary of the Navy. The Air Force has a Secretary of the Air Force. They are all civilians. They are all in charge of those branches of military, and they report directly to the Secretary of Defense. There is a strong civilian level of oversight to where the military is not in charge, but the civilians are in charge of the military. There is also the Joint Chiefs of Staff, where the Chief of Staff for, say, the Navy, the Chief of Staff for the Navy, Naval Operations, sits on the Joint Chiefs. The chair now is also Admiral Mullen, who is a Navy admiral. He is the chair of the Joint Chiefs. Normally, and this is how it was set up, the Uniform Code of Military Justice was passed in 46-47. It was to make uniform and to apply to all members in uniform for a branch of military, but to make all the codes of law, military law, for the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, even the Marine Corps, all the same, so that they would all be under the same system, abiding by the same system of laws, and make them not only compliant but uniform. The Coast Guard was not brought into and under that system in 46 or 47. Instead, it was brought under the Administrative Procedure Act, which is civilian law civilian law, to carry on administrative remedial only proceedings in Article 2, similar to military trials or tribunals for the military. The Navy is only supposed to be carrying on military trials of its own personnel, Navy personnel that are paid by the Navy directly and in uniform. They are not to lose any pay, rank, grade, medical benefits, or even legal aid. And in these proceedings, they are, to a large extent, supposed to have legal counsel to protect and defend them, and they are presumed innocent. The Coast Guard, however, is presuming that individuals are guilty, and although they are declaring and claiming that individuals within these proceedings are acting under the authority of their federal license and federal position, that they are denying them pay, medical benefits, legal aid, and even if they had many of these things when the proceedings started, like myself 5 years ago, they are stripping individuals of these benefits and rights and protections, to the point where, you know, at some point I was actually homeless because of what the Coast Guard did. I've actually been able to pull myself up literally out of the gutter to some extent, come before you to explain what is going on behind the scenes. I'm not in the Coast Guard, never been in the Coast Guard. They are working with the shipping companies, both domestic and foreign, with the protection and indemnity insurance clubs, with the maritime unions, labor unions, who are all federal contractors and get paid by the United States under very specific guidelines, and they're using this broad system not only to replace things that these federal contractors are supposed to provide and are in fact paid by the United States to provide under federal contracts as line items, they're using the Coast Guard to not only as a form of risk management or preventions, but to prevent anyone from complaining about what is going on in the system. And this is very dangerous, not only as to issues of civil defense, but also national security. Because if we have American flag or even foreign flag vessels coming into or leaving the United States that are unsafe, whether it be pollution laws, even what's coming out of the smokestack of the vessel, or any dumping that is going on, unsafe operations, smuggling, events coming into, whether it be an issue of a typhoid Mary, an individual or groups of individuals who are being smuggled into the United States in containers, small weapons traffic. These are all actual events that are going on, and it goes into issues of port security, where the federal maritime officers such as myself and others under American flag are coming under attack. And this is actually occurring to a large degree from individuals not only in state and federal government, but also private corporations here in the United States, but most importantly, those abroad. Right now, China has the largest merchant fleet in the world, which, with what is going on in the United States as to the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, war in general around the world, without a strong United States merchant marine and federal fleet, it puts our country in grave danger. And because I have attempted to raise some of these issues and to open up the avenues for redress that have been shut down unlawfully and illegally to be able to siphon off money from the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. Coast Guard has come after me, pulled me out of civil court, and been prosecuting me for the last 5 years at your expense. I've mentioned in some of the other shows some of the things that are going on. And what is important about this is they are ignoring my Naval Commission. They are ignoring that I went to a sister academy to Kings Point, the United States Merchant Marine Academy, where I come out with a Naval Commission and a secret security clearance. They are ignoring that I'm not in the Coast Guard, and they are declaring and alleging that I am a civilian, which if they are successful in what they are doing in using military law and a branch of military to prosecute me as a civilian, this means it can be used upon you. And that is very, 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 very dangerous. And the military is not supposed to be in charge of any civilians ever. And what they've done is they're using these proceedings to grab a hold of, detain, investigate, seize documents without warrants. They've actually gone as far as to seize my medical records and falsify medical records. And when you look at some of these individuals who are involved, like Walter J. Brzezinski, he is not only Lieutenant Commander in the Coast Guard, he has also been involved in administrative law cases where he has ruled on not only commerce cases involving Iran and limiting parts from getting into Iran, which limits supply and demand and crude prices around the globe, which goes into oil profiteering. He's also ruled on a case called Rendon versus TSA, Transportation Security Administration, where this individual Rendon or Rendon, he was an actual TSA agent who was he was on travel, went through an airport, and he went through the screening facility. He cursed because they asked him to step aside. The alarms went off. He stepped aside. It took an extraordinary long period of time, I assume. He got extremely upset, cursed. They shut down the station, called over the police, and cited him $700 for cursing in a public facility in an airport. This actually went before Walter J. Brzezinski. He ruled on it that it was not an imposition upon free speech to charge and cite this individual $700 for cursing in an airport. This also was converted to go after all civilians like you, to where it went into the Sixth Circuit, And now if you go into an airport and you curse, $700 fine. This is a racket. This is being set up by those who are using the administrative system as a program of judicial racketeering and insurance racketeering. The Coast Guard is deeply involved in this. Admiral Allen is fully aware of this and has not done anything to investigate and go after those involved, including Walter J. Brzezinski. He actually reappointed Chief Administrative Law Judge Enolia, who went ahead and assigned Brzezinski to my own case. Walter J. Brzezinski is involved in a lot more than that. He was also involved in sitting on many of the 9/11 trust cases for the families who were affected by 9/11, where a lot of that money did not go into the hands of the families that were affected. So there is a whole system of racketeering that is going on underneath this, from within this administration, but under the cloak and veil of war. Because it is easy to, under military law, anyone who speaks up and tries to get word out to the public about what is really going on can be seized. And there is the Warner Defense Authorization Bill that has changed much of our constitutional rights. This goes into even issues of writ of habeas corpus. Military Commissions Act, that they're modeling these military tribunals that the Coast Guard is carrying on. HR 1955, and look these up on the internet and read up on them, and also SB 1959, which are the Domestic Terrorist and Radicalization Act, to study what makes an individual become a terrorist here in the United States, not over in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when you start to really dig deep into the language of these laws and the Patriot Act and the Homeland Security Act and many other laws that are being passed on almost a daily basis, we are, so far down that slippery slope into overall all-out fascism, corporatism. I read to you I read to you in another show a passage from this book, The Shield of Achilles, and in here he goes into the information about what these individuals, the neocons, these Republicans, and granted, I went to a military academy, graduated from a military academy, I came out as a naval officer. I was a Republican for the longest period of time, and I have seen the error in my ways and realized that these individuals who have taken over the Republican Party are nothing but a bunch of warmongers who are trying to sell us endless war, and who believe that we elect a king for 4 years or up to 8 years. And I am deeply concerned with what is going on in this nation now, not only with the Coast Guard, but recent events with the new Attorney General McCasey not going to uphold the contempt charges and the order issued by Congress for Harriet Miers and Josh Bolton. Recent comments by President Bush about Barack Obama focusing on his campaign with Hillary Clinton. You can go on. There has been not only many of the other acts that I mentioned, the Military Commissions Act and more, also Article 51. Look it up, go on the internet, start to do a little bit of research and see what this is all about. They are changing our constitutional order right in front of our eyes and using the veil of war, and it's really not, this is not a declared war. Iraq did not declare war on us. They did not attack us. They are using the Constitution and abusing the Constitution to a large extent. The President's power and authority to repel an invasion under Article 2, Section 2, and use the naval forces for that. That's why you hear President Bush come out and say that we're fighting them over there so that we don't have to fight them here. And that is his roundabout way to say that, without saying it, because then people would really be up in arms about what is going on, that he is repelling an invasion, so that he is acting within the Constitution, although we've seen the redefinitions of the terms on torture. Much of this is going on not only because of what's going on in my own situation, but the situation of many people here in America where, as per our own civil code, the loss of society is considered a matter of tort, that it is a form of, or can be considered a form of torture. And not only are they redefining what is torture, they're redefining who is or can be identified as a member of Al-Qaeda. Individuals like myself who have not only spoken up, but who have gone into federal district court to try to not only go after federal contractors who are violating the law, but also to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law, and to keep it away from the arbitrary and capricious rule of men, which goes to kings and queens, feudalism, royalism, self-appointed royal families, and much of this is coming out of not only England, but Austria, Bavaria, Germany, England, and much of the European countries. And if you read, I cannot, you know, I hate to say it because I know who and what he is and what he's all about, but there is so much good information in this book, The Shield of Achilles. I recommend that you read it because it does go into war, peace, and the course of history and how it is used to change the constitutional order. And that is exactly what we are living through now. And the only way that this can be confronted, slowed down, prevented, changed, and civil order reclaimed by the American people and the people of the world is to draw down on this war, to bring the troops home, to end the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and to prevent any further war from developing in Iran. Iran does not pose any real threat to us. These wars are being sold to us by those who are making a killing, and I hate to use that pun because that is exactly what is going on, off of the war profiteering, the oil profiteering. All you have to do is look at the issues of even the National Strategic Oil Reserve, and this gets back to the Coast Guard. The current administration is trying to set up another National Strategic Oil Reserve, much like what is set up for the Department of Defense or the Navy. This goes to Teapot Dome and the scandal from the early 1910s and 1920s, but also to set up another National Strategic Oil Reserve under the Coast Guard, and the President has already taken $20 billion of additional oil off the market that we paid for as taxpayers, but we also again paid for once again at the pump, because taking that $20 billion of oil and fuel and kerosene and heating oil and more off of the market also affected supply and demand, which affected prices, which affected what we pay for gasoline and more at the pump. These are issues that you must get into, that you must become involved in politically, because this is your country. If you do not, the constitutional order will be rewritten. There's another great quote in here, Bismarck, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it, but it was basically, if there is going to be revolution, and I'm not declaring or coming out and saying, you know, that we should carry on revolution, but I'm quoting from Bismarck, that if there is to be revolution, that basically to let us carry it on, let us embrace it, then rather, I'm trying to think, he said, rather than to undergo it, let us carry it on effectively, and again, I'm paraphrasing. Basically, rather than have it forced upon us, as is what is going on with 95% of the people out here, they want to take control of it and carry on the revolution themselves. And they are carrying on a revolution behind the scenes that very few people can see or understand or know or realize what is going on. And the North American Union, the North American Free Trade Agreements are part of this. They're trying to use the North American Free Trade Agreement to supplant and dissolve our own Constitution that many people have lived and died for. They've shed not only blood, sweat, and tears, but many of their own family members in protecting our republic, protecting our Constitution, and protecting our people. And what is going on right now is not about that. It is actually about dissolving that from within, just as has happened to every other republic throughout time. And the Soviet Union is a more timely or contemporary example of this. And they are trying to now do the very same thing here in the United States. The Coast Guard is actively involved in this, as is Admiral Allen. And I ask that you investigate and start to get into what the Coast Guard is up to. They've prosecuted a Coast Guard cadet, a student at the Coast Guard Academy, first time ever in 130 years or 139-year history of the Coast Guard. Not only was he black, interestingly enough, this has never happened, but they prosecuted a student under military law. Think about that, because then if you extend that and extrapolate that out to Reserve Officer Training Corps and officers studying at, say, a university like University of Texas, they also somehow now could come under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Well, where do you go from there? Then all of a sudden, all students are under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And what's scary about that is that now Admiral Brewer, who is a former admiral from Military Sea Lift Command, has been named by Mayor Villaraigosa as the superintendent for LA Unified School District, which is the second largest school district in the nation. This has happened and come about not just because of Mayor Villaraigosa, and also the large set of billions of dollars that are sitting in there in construction funds and more, but to turn LA Unified School District into a nursery for soldiers and sailors. They are prepping us right now for World War. It is not about Iran and any kind of real threat from Iran. It is about maintaining this new feudal constitutional order, the rule of men and women rather than the rule of law that is being hoisted and foisted and forced upon us and will be maintained upon us unless we can get this situation not only in Iraq but Afghanistan and in other countries to draw down and to get the United States to begin to prevent and stop these aggressive wars that it is carrying on throughout the world, because it is not only endangering our country, it is being carried out and intended to take our country down. Much like Osama bin Laden was actually a CIA construct paid for by the CIA to sucker the Russians into Afghanistan to impoverish their country basically as a sandpit or quagmire, and Afghanistan and Iraq is the very same thing. And the reason we cannot get out, the reason they will not get us out, is because these wars are intended to take our country down. We now have a $12 trillion debt. Things are getting worse. The home mortgage fiasco, the currency issues, and more. We're being set up not only for another, not recession, but depression and subsequent world war. Start thinking, people, about what's going on. I ask you to go online, Google my name, and anything that you can do to call, write your own congressmen and senators and the Coast Guard to try to get them out of my life. I would deeply appreciate it so that I can bring more critical analysis and information to you. Peace. Thank you.
Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.